Shalom to everybody. We are on Parshat Vaera, and brief history of well, it's more it's more than brief. Just a couple of morsels about Rav Shneur Zalman Miliadi, the father of CHABAD. As you can see in the outline, he was born 1745, and he passed away in 1812, lived about 68 years. The Rav Miliadi was really a Pele. He was one of those figures who really transformed the Jewish world. He was a third generation Chassid of Chassidim. In other words, there was a Baal Shem Tov. He had a Talmud. The main Talmud was the Maggid Mimezerich. And afterwards, the Maggid Mimezerich had 5 Talmudim, 5 disciples, and the main one was Rav Shneur Zalman from the town of Ladi. It's called after that town. And he was, as we now all know, he was a person who was an absolute prodigy. He had a tremendous Talmid Chacham who knew the entire Torah in all its forms, Nigla and Nistar, Halacha and Kabbalah. He was a totally charismatic personality. And I'll tell you something that it's amazing, but I've got the cutting out in the newspaper that Rav Soloveitchik once said. This is his version that he got as a tradition, that we all know that Rav Shneur Zalman wanted to meet with the Gaon Vilna and somehow to calm and to bring about some sort of peace in the tremendous, like a war that raged between the Hasidim and between the Mitnagdim. And we all know the story that the Gra wouldn't meet with Rav Shneur Zalman. The point is, what Rav Soloveitchik adds on, that the tradition of his family was that the Gra thought that if he felt that if he met Rav Shneur Zalman, that it would cause Rav Shneur Zalman to convince him to be a chassid. I once said I'd like to make 3 doctorates on that if I had the time. First of all, to show who Rav Shneur Zalman was. I can imagine that the Gra said that he wasn't a young teenager. He was already towards the end of his life. Can you imagine that at that age, with that stature, he actually felt and he thought that Rav Shneur Zalman would have the capacity to influence him and to turn him into a chassid? It shows you something about Rav Shneur Zalman. It shows you something also about the Gaon. Can you imagine how people are so open to learning and how vibrant they are, how creative they are, that they so open-minded that they could be they open to like change and to influences that when they've already like sort of set in their ways. So that shows you already what a type of person that we're speaking about. So Rav Shneur Zalman, he was born in sort of like Lithuania, Russia, that area, and he's thirsting for Torah. There were 2 main centers, one in Mezerich, one in Vilna. He thought, look, in Vilna they'll teach me sort of how to learn, and I think I know more or less how to learn. And what I want to do is I want to know how to pray. So that's why he decided to go to Mezerich, and then that's when he became a Talmud of the Maggid Mimezerich, and that's when he started, when Maggid Mimezerich passed away, and other Talmudim of his went to Eretz Israel. So that's when he sort of took over and founded like CHABAD Hasidism. Just one note, I'm not going in a particular order. He also wanted to go on Aliyah. He was 32 years old. In the year 1777, he wanted to go on Aliyah. He started to go. Very interesting. The Gra also wanted exactly the same thing. And like his colleague, the Gra, it was abandoned, except whereas with the Gra, we don't know why he abandoned his trip to Eretz Israel. When it came to Rav Shneur Zalman, the Baal haTanya, he was convinced by the people that you know what, he has to be in Chutz La'aretz, and then he went back and he taught Torah. He wrote three like classical works, mamash classics. Everyone reads them, everyone learns them. It doesn't make a difference if a person's a chosid or not a chosid. The one is his classic Shulchan Aruch Harav. He was asked by the Maggid Mezerich that he should upgrade, so to speak, the Shulchan Aruch, and that's what he did. He wrote a book, Shulchan Aruch Harav, at 7 volumes, where the bulk of it is on Orach Chaim. It's on the day-to-day halachot. There's a little bit on Choshen Mishpat. There's nothing on Eben Ezer, which is the laws of like family getting married, etc., and nothing really on Yaradah. He wanted to write it afterwards, but he didn't manage. It's a classic that everyone who is involved in Psak Halacha always refers to the Shulchan Aruch Harav. And within the Shulchan Aruch Harav, one of his classical pieces, again, quoted by everyone and anyone who is speaking about the subject, is his works on Talmud Torah. The second great work, the masterpiece, which is printed over and over again in multiple languages and learned, whether one's a chassid or mitnagid, whether Zan is not Zan, it makes no difference. That's his Tanya. Who hasn't heard and who hasn't learned a little bit, at least the pieces of the Tanya. The third sefer that he wrote was, he sort of upgraded and that he restructured, which people who are non-CHABAD don't really use. That's the Sidur of CHABAD, in which what he did was he sort of rewrote, according to the Nusach and principles of the Ari, he rewrote the Sidur, which is used by CHABAD Chassidim. So what he actually did was that he not only was a person who spread, and as we all know, like from CHABAD today, that as a father of CHABAD, there's not like a corn in the world which there isn't a CHABAD, and he's the father of that philosophy of. But nevertheless, so I was saying that his Sidur is only for Chabad Chassidim, but basically what he did was he made a change in the whole mentality of Chassidei Chabad. They think in a certain way, they act in a certain way, they daven in a certain way. That's what was so one of the things which was so unique about him. But as we can see that, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly some of the things that the main things that he said, because there's a couple of key sentences, but I'll try. Of course, when he's used the word Chabad, we all got the picture of that there are 10 Sfirot. The 10 Sfirot are the 10 powers in which Hashem uses in order to influence and to have contact with the world. Well, there is another Sfira which is called Keter, the crown, and it's not a shiur in Kabbalah, which I myself don't know much. So I don't want to speak about things I don't really know, but the rudimentary amount of the Sfirot, the SS Sfirot, it starts off with the top three are Chochmah, Bina, V'Dat. Chochmah is knowledge, wisdom, and knowledge, Bina, understanding, Dat, and is wisdom, in which you've got an application of the Chochmah and the Bina. Those are the top three, and then there's Chagat Nehim. Chagat Nehim are the seven others, which are the seven, we'll call them sort of like emotional Sfirot, of kindness, of courage, and being valiant, etc. So by saying, starting off Chabad Chassidut, what he did was, that was like the essence. The essence is that a person, every single Jew is said, has got Emunah Pshuta. We're born with an innate Emunah. What is Emunah? Emunah is an innate force which connects us to Hashem and to everything which is outside us. Primarily vadai, basically to Hashem. And this force of emunah is so basic to a Jew that, as the saying goes, that from that, sorry, excuse me, as the saying goes, that the Ganav, he davens to Hashem that he should help him not be caught. That's how basic emunah is. But the whole point of Chokhmah Bina V'Da'at is that a person should now take this basic forces, or the basic emotions, or the basic connection that a person's got to Hashem, and if what he does is he subjugates it to Chokhmah Bina V'Da'at. In other words, that the intellect will now direct all these forces, then the emunah will become so great that it will be so strong that a person will never ever falter in that emunah. So that's what he wanted to do. The Chokhmah Bina V'Da'at was to think of what Chokhmah we're speaking about. We're speaking about that to focus on the greatness of Hashem, the infinity of Hashem, the power of Hashem, the love of Hashem. When we think and we intellectualize our faith, that we make the CHABAD, we make that the primary force in our lives. So then that brings us to a strength in emunah. That was, like in a nutshell, what his whole philosophy was about. In other places, there's all sorts of permutations that come out of that. Of course, the CHABAD was known also for Hashem wanted to have a dira b'tachtonim. Hashem wanted that he would have a place to live in a world which is, so to speak, like hidden from him. And so that's what we have to do, and we do it through Chokhmah Bina V'Da'at. The Baal haTanya, what he did was he suffered also a lot because of the raging controversy which occurred between the Mitnagdim and the Hasidim. While the Vilna Gaon was alive, there was Charamin, there was forms of sort of not excommunication, but putting a person in the Hasidim into Chayrim, but that's where, in inverted commas, it stopped. Where it got totally out of hand was once the Gaon Vilna passed away. So then what the opponents of the CHABAD, of the Baal haTanya, resorted to was malshinut, mamash, that they went to the Russian authorities and they accused the Baal haTanya of subservience behavior, supporting the enemy. There were basically two types of ta'anot. The one ta'ana was that he sent money to his Hasidim, to the Hasidim of CHABAD and others in Eretz Israel, which was ruled by the Turks, which was an enemy of Russia. So that was number one. And number two, we all know that in the 1812s, that's when Napoleon invaded Russia, and then they accused him also of supporting, sort of being a spy for Napoleon, which is exactly the opposite. Because the Hasidic world and the rabbinic world, they were basically divided. Some people supported, most people supported, or some members supported Napoleon because of the terrible persecutions of the Tsar. And he, Davka the Baal haTanya, supported the Tsar, not because he was a lover of the Tsar, but he just thought that if Napoleon succeeds, then it will bring to tremendous economic freedom, but it will also bring to total assimilation. So that's why he supported that. Bakitsur, he was arrested twice. On Yud Tet Kislev, he was released on the first time. That's when it became a Yom Tov for him and for all Hasidut. It's like looked at as the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidut. And another time, second time, again he was arrested, and again he was released. The people understood we're speaking about a majestic character over here who all these are just like false claims. But Kitsu, by the time the second time he was he was released, and then he had to flee from one place to another place because Napoleon had invaded Russia. So, I mean, his ill health got the better of him, and he died in 1812. So that's just a little. I mean, everyone knows about Rav Shneur Zalman and the Baal haTanya. There's so much to speak about him. There's so much books written about him. So I'll just be very brief for just 15 minutes. One idea from the Parsha connected to the CHABAD is as follows. The Torah tells us that one of the 10 plagues was the plague of the frogs, and there's an interesting midrash says that this plague of the frogs was an essential component, but really more than even some of the other plagues, in bringing about like a breaking of Egyptian culture and causing the Paro to release Am Yisrael. So the point is, what is so essential and what is so great about the plague of the tzvardeya, of the frogs? So the Vaera Rebbe, based on things that are written by the Baal haTanya, he explains like this. He says, first of all, axiom number one is that the purpose of the plagues was not only that to serve as a punishment, but more than that. But it was to break the whole cultural, ideological system of the Pharaoh and to show that Be'emet Hashem is ruling the world. And that's why we'll see the whole time in the plagues it says, when Hashem speaks to Paro by Moshe, that he says to him that you will come to know that I am Hashem. So it's not only a punishment, but it's also to prove, it's also to restructure the ideology. So what has this now got to do? How's the tzvardeya? How does this achieve that? So his explanation is as follows. There are three types of non-Jewish leaders in the world. The one is like a person like Bilam. He's like a wretched character, but on the one hand, he understands that he is Hashem, and he understands that he has to watch. To one form or another, what he does is he submits himself to Hashem. He asks permission, for example, from Hashem to go into curse Bnei Israel as obnoxious and as evil, and it's not only that. It's so like it's such a stira, it's slightly self-contradictory to ask Hashem where they can go now and to curse the Jewish people who are his people. Okay, but be that as it may, there is over here a connection and recognition of Hashem, but in a terrible way like Bilam. Then there's other people like Sancherev, who are type of leaders who they don't submit to Hashem, or none. They recognize that there's some form of power of Hashem, and but they say that they're supreme, they're greater than Hashem. Hashem is not as great as them. That's a person like Sancherev who is a rebel against Hashem. And then there's a type of person who in the Chassidut is referred to as the Paro type of person, who says, I don't know Hashem, never heard of him, don't know who he is. But actually what this type of person is a person who's totally indifferent to the whole inyan of Hashem. He's totally apathetic. He's got the Nile. He says that the Nile is a god. I made the Nile, in fact, he says in Yechezkel. So the whole inyan of God is something which is, it's just not it's just something which is like another issue. It's not something that it represents the forces of apathy, and corresponding to those three types of rulers. So the Babacha says there are three types or three categories of animals. There's animals which are nice animals, like nice pets, or like or animals which help us to work, like animals which give us food and clothing, like sheep, etc. Then there's animals which are animals which are rebellious, animals which are harm us, like crocodiles, etc., mosquitoes, etc. Then there's animals which are like just neutral. They what difference does it make if they're there or not there? I mean, there's and the frog, that is the animal which is, let's say, a neutral animal. It's not an animal which is bad, not an animal which is good. I mean, well, it's exactly that. It's something which is in the middle. And the point then of these frogs, like irritating and driving the Egyptians mad, was not so much that it should be a punishment because they used to drive the Jewish people crazy by waking them up every single day to come to work. So therefore, they also couldn't sleep because the frogs croaked the whole time. But it was to show that, you know what, symbolically, that even these neutral things, there's no such a thing as neutral. These neutral things, they can turn now and they can become things which are detrimental to the Egyptians on the basis of Hashem's instruction. So that's why the Torah is saying, the Midrash is saying, that the plague of Paro, of the Tzfaradim, were essential. It was essential to drive back this point that Hashem, you cannot be indifferent, you cannot be apathetic. And all those things that you think are neutral, okay, it's nice, it's cute, it's this, but what does it make a difference to me? Even these things, right, they have a purpose enough. These things, there's no such a thing really as neutral. And this is why this is an essential part of destroying the ideology and culture of the Egyptians, and to know that Vidatem Keni Hashem, that in the end, everything that there is in the world is really based on Hashem.